Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'll be going over my thoughts on the main questions in PMQs, as usual, with Starmer directing his attention on the growing mess that Kemi Badenoch is making over management of the Horizon Post Office scandal as it relates to her department's management of compensation, as well as to discuss the Gaza vote that's going to be going on this evening, given that Stephen Flynn asked his questions on that. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So I've already done a couple of videos on the bun fight between former Post Office Chair Henry Staunton and Kemi Badenoch, which kicked off at the weekend when Staunton made allegations of Badenoch's department wanting compensation to be stalled until after the election. Now, just to cover the main points again, because it's important to understand Starmer's line of questioning. Staunton made a number of allegations, but the most explosive is that he was told by a senior civil servant to effectively stall costs arising from the fallout of the Horizon scandal, including, of course, compensation payment, in order that the government could limp towards the election, as he said. In other words, leave major financial liabilities for the next government to have to deal with. Badenoch then immediately fired back, first getting her department to publish a letter which they claim disproves the allegation. However, it does not. The letter actually makes clear that the top priority for Staunton was to manage, amongst other things, legal costs to ensure medium-term viability. Now, medium-term viability is very much in line with Staunton's claim that the department was interested in delaying major costs, that they were interested in the financial health of the department up to the election, not really before. Medium term, right? Now, for added context, because there'll be people who are minded to believe Badenoch and they're looking at this letter going, oh, but it doesn't actually say to stall compensation. It's like, well, yes, it's very nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Obviously, the department's not going to write a letter telling him to delay compensation explicitly. However, it does tell him to make sure there is medium-term financial viability. Everyone knows that the two major costs which would prevent the department having a clean balance sheet in the medium term would be compensation to victims, which is going to run to an awful lot of money, and replacing the much maligned Horizon system. So delaying the major costs of both of these until after the election would make the balance sheet of the department look way better. Anyone who can't see that is either just too tribal to be thinking about this particular issue critically, or they're just not capable of critical thinking at all. But there was another thing. Staunton claims that he had a verbal meeting with the senior civil servant, and it was so extraordinary he wrote a file note in response to that verbal conversation, then emailed it to himself and other officials at the time. Yesterday, social media was full of Tory shills saying that he should publish his evidence. Oh, if you've got this evidence, you'd publish it. Well, today he has, or rather he's passed it on to the Times, who have published it. And this is where Starmer began. After paying tribute to Navalny, who was murdered by the Kremlin, of course, he asked Sunak if he would repeat the claim made by Kemi Badenoch that Staunton was lying about the claim to go slow on compensation. Should be easy, shouldn't it? But Sunak did not answer the question. Instead, he said that Badenoch asked Staunton to step down after serious concerns were raised. But given that Badenoch had been very clear that Staunton was lying, why wouldn't Sunak back her up? The fact that he would not even answer the question, because remember, the question had nothing to do with Staunton's dismissal. It was about a specific claim. It shows you what I'd said about Badenoch at the time. She's behaved very rashly. The Prime Minister can't possibly back her up. A capable politician would not have responded to Staunton's allegations until they knew the strength of their own hand as well as the strength of Staunton's. What could he prove? What evidence do I have? That's what you need to ask. That's what a canny politician would ask. Badenoch just steamed in mob-handed and is now looking very foolish. So foolish that although Sunak can't disown her or her behaviour, nor can he back it up. Then Starmer referenced the note which appears to back up Staunton's claims. He asked if Sunak would order an investigation into what happened. Now, this is important. Consider that there are three possibilities here. The first is that Staunton is lying, as Badenoch claims, or at the very least was mistaken about what he thought the department were asking him to do. He didn't understand, right? However, the evidence so far has not discredited any of his claims and has actually backed them up. The second possibility is that senior civil servants took it upon themselves to tell Staunton to stall compensation, but they didn't have specific instructions from ministers to do so. So in other words, the people at fault here are one or more senior civil servants. The third possibility is that Staunton's claims are wholly accurate and that it was being driven by ministerial instruction, implied or explicit, almost certainly involving Badenoch. And it is very much a matter of public interest to find out which is the case. So when Sunak refused to commit to the investigation, which of course he did, he was saying that either he doesn't care which of those three things is true, or he doesn't want anyone to officially tell him which of those three things is true. Sunak kept switching to this thing, my priority is getting the compensation to the victims. But this entire mess is all about compensation to the victims. It's not a side issue. There is a credible accusation that the government may be delaying the payment of that compensation, and the government, by being so evasive about it all, are adding credibility to those claims against them. Then Starmer threw out the BBC report at the start of the week, which suggested that there was a deliberate cover-up at the Post Office in 2016 and a suggestion that the government may have known that that cover-up was going on. Sunak's response to this was to say that an inquiry was underway. Now, this is quite interesting. So Sunak can support an inquiry, a long-term inquiry, of course, into what his now Foreign Secretary knew about the situation while he was Prime Minister in 2016. But he won't set up a much smaller short-term inquiry into what his business secretary knew about a different but related cover-up just last year. Is that because this main inquiry is not going to report back before the election, but an internal investigation into Staunton's claims couldn't take that long and would be able to report back before the election? Starmer then asked Sunak if he'd asked his colleagues what they knew of the 2016 cover-up. Because obviously Sunak, he was an MP in 2016, but he'd only just become an MP, so he wouldn't have known a great deal. So did he ask colleagues who would have been senior at the time as well? Again, Sunak said, oh no, there's an inquiry on, and that's the right way to do this. But that's a nonsense. Sunak is the Prime Minister now, and he insists that he's trying to get victims their compensation quickly. But if there's a suggestion that some in his government are holding up the compensation, why wouldn't he ask questions about it? Starmer then brought up a specific case of a postmaster waiting for the government to sort things out. Again, the inquiry was invoked. It's just like Boris Johnson before him. Sunak thinks he doesn't have to answer questions if there's an inquiry going on, even though in this case the inquiry isn't actually directly related, because we're talking about an instruction about the payment of compensation from the last year or so. It's the here and now. The inquiry is about the original scandal and cover-up. But before I move on, I will just say Badenoch is getting herself into hot water, as I suspected. She's essentially making this a case of who do you believe, me or him? Because although there's no conclusive proof that Staunton is telling the truth, nor has Badenoch been able to come up with anything that even contradicts what he's saying, right? The problem with this idea of who do you believe, me or him? First of all, it usually doesn't go well for politicians because people default to politicians aren't all that honest, right? But Badenoch has been caught out in two unrelated lies just this week. She's been called out again over false claims made about the Canadian trade deal talks. And then, in fact, this was covered in Parliament today again, but it was reported, I think, yesterday. But a Labour MP called it out today. So Badenoch, she's, as well as the Business and Trade Secretary, she's also Equalities Minister. And she said she'd engaged extensively with LGBT organisations as part of her equalities brief. But the record shows she has not attended a single LGBT event. Now, if you're going to take part in a row of major public interest, like the Post Office scandal, and your only defence is basically saying to people, look, only one of us is telling the truth, who do you think is the honest one? Maybe don't get caught out in two really easily provable lies in the same week. Finally, Starmer turned to a different scandal, the infected blood scandal. Another mess where compensation is due and is being delayed. He asked Sunak if he'd made sure that the government is not limping towards the election by delaying payments for this group as well. And this was an interesting question because it links up with an article in the Mirror that's doing the rounds again, but it was published over a month ago, The article pointed out that there are a number of groups who are due compensation where the process seems to be taking a hell of a long time. You've got the post office victims, you've got the infected blood victims, you've got the victims of Grenfell, you've got Windrush victims, Waspy Woman, and others as well. There now exists a growing list of groups who've been subject to injustices, and it's been proven, it's not like there's cases going on, it's been proven they're owed compensation. Compensation is long overdue for many of these people, but the process is tortuously slow. The point was made that this is deliberate on the part of the Tories, not just because they don't care about the victims and they don't like paying out to ordinary people, but because it loads up the in-tray for Labour when they come to power. Because after the election, the Labour government are going to have to clear this mess up. And that will limit the time and energy that their own ministers will have to deal with progress in other areas. The suggestion is that this delay in compensation is not just about making their balance sheets look a bit better at the election, but very much part of their obvious scorched earth policy, causing as much damage to the country as possible purely to make life difficult for a Labour government. That's immoral. It's also a betrayal of your own country. And it goes without saying that Sunak didn't answer that question either, deferring to a different inquiry this time. I don't know why Sunak just doesn't order an inquiry into his entire government, due to report in 20 years, and then just not answer questions on anything ever again. I mean, that'll cover him for everything, wouldn't it? Whatever he gets asked, oh, sorry, there's an inquiry. I don't answer questions if there's an inquiry. Then Stephen Flynn, the SNP, tried to drag the last drops of use out of his own party's culture war. He said that the Israeli government is clearly not acting in self-defense, true enough, but he also said that the House of Commons should present a united statement referencing their motion today. Unfortunately, although he says he wants the House of Commons to present a united statement, he has refused to work with other party leaders in order to agree the wording of this united statement. But it's very difficult to say a great deal more. So as I was just about to record this, the issue of the SNP's motion was in a terrible mess. The SNP, of course, are presenting their motion. Labour have said, well, yeah, we're sort of going along with it. Can we just emphasise the fact that this ceasefire should be sustainable? And the SNP said, no, you're going to vote for our motion or not. What's it to be? So then Labour have gone, well, look, we'll just present our own amendment to it then. We think you will agree with this. We just think you're playing silly buggers. So then that would be fine, but for the fact the Tories then spying the fact that the SNP were just trying to make things difficult for Labour said, well, we'll present our own motion. Now, under the normal course of events, opposition presents a motion, right? An amendment can be suggested, but if the government suggests an amendment, the government's amendment gets priority. And that means under the normal course of events, Labour's amendment cannot be heard and voted on today. So basically the SNP and Tories teaming up in order to try and make things difficult for Labour. However, just as I came out to record it, I have heard that the Speaker, who's obviously none too impressed with the very obvious party politicking over murdered victims, has decided to let the Labour motion go, the Labour amendment, go through anyway. So, but basically it was two parties playing with people's lives whilst pretending to care about the issue. All very messy, very unpleasant. And, you know, as part of the party politicking, I also hear, although I don't know this for certain, that because the SNP were going to have two debates today and they dropped one of them in order to focus, they were going to have another one. But again, it makes it really blindingly obvious. All they're doing at the moment is trying to create a wedge issue with Labour, which is fine. That is party politicking. They were going to debate the Labour's former £28 billion investment, for example. And they're going to drop that to focus on the Gaza thing because they think they get more mileage out of this. And as I say, thanks to the Tories doing them a favour, they really thought they could use the murder of thousands of innocent children to win them a few grubby votes in the election later this year. And I know some of you will not like hearing that, but I don't like hearing people who pretend to care about the murders in Gaza and yet use the situation for their own political advantage. It is disgusting, and I will never stop saying so. But politics has a very dirty underbelly, and it's going to be on full show this year. I mean, what we're going to see today is nothing compared with what I think is still to come. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.